The first time I met Rick Smolan, a photographer of prodigious output, he had just published a book called From Alice to Ocean. And it told the story of a young girl, Australian young girl, who decided she was going to walk across the Australian desert from Alice Springs all the way to the Indian Ocean. And Rick Smolan documented that and published this exquisite photo picture book of the experience. Rick has been with us several times. Was it last year or 2 years ago, Rick? Yeah, and some of you may know that I have a little section of Queen Street in Toronto here that's actually named after myself, probably the most singular honor, I think, you can receive. There are only about a half dozen of these in town, and it pleases me no end that the others, I have to be careful how I say it, it pleases me no end that I'm the only one that's alive. And the reason I mention that is that's a singular honor, but it's rare that someone could have the honor that Rick has received, because there's a movie out. There's a movie out starring Mia Wasikowska. It's in the theaters right now, and there's a character in this movie called Rick Smolan. Rick, come on out here.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's lovely.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm going to put my props down here. So, first of all, it's an incredible honor to speak ever at Idea City, let alone to be invited back several times. And 2 years ago, Natasha and I were on stage here, and I told you all a love story about how we first met. And I wanted to tell you another love story today, very briefly. But how many of you remember the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow? It's one of those movies that for a lot of people it's like a great metaphor. You think of your life sometimes, and you think of one moment that at the moment appears to be unimportant and random, and you look back on your life and you think at that moment, if the trajectory of your life took a completely different direction at a moment that nothing appeared to be happening. So I want to tell you about one of those moments, and then tell you about how that moment not only affected my life, but affected Natasha's life, Uncle Gene, who you see photographing here on stage, and literally hundreds of other people around the world. There have been babies, marriages, deaths, all kinds of consequences from the moment I'm going to tell you about. Okay, so we've got the first picture up there. So when I was 28 years old, I was sent by Time magazine to the outback of Australia to do a cover story on Aborigines. And there was a social worker who the writer had worked with, and he said, when you get to town, call this woman before you get there, and she'll take you into the Aboriginal camps and get your permission to take pictures. I walked out of my hotel. I was making a right to go down the street to meet this young woman, and there was a flash of light. Something caught my eye, and I looked up the street, and there was a young woman washing the windows of my hotel. Incredibly, the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. In this tight sarong, blonde hair, blue eyes. I was 28 years old. I had 3 cameras around my neck. So I did what any red-blooded American or Canadian would do, which is I took some photographs of her, and she got incredibly upset and said, "What the hell are you doing? Who the hell are you? Put your goddamn cameras down." And I learned a long time ago when people get upset, and very rarely do people get upset, but when they do, I always go over and apologize. So I walked over to her and said, "I'm really sorry, the light was so beautiful." And she said, "What are you, some kind of fucking parasite? Journalist?" And I said, "You're here to photograph Aborigines, right? You guys come in here every week, you take advantage of these poor people. It's like, just get the hell out of here." And I said, "Oh, excuse me." And she said, "Oh, you're American," which usually was a good thing in Australia. Anyway, I apologized and I left. I worked with this social worker all day in the camps. At the end of the day, the woman that I was working with said, "What are you doing for dinner tonight?" I said, "I'm going to go back to my room and label we used rolls of film back then." And I said, "I'm going to work on captions." And she said, "Well, a group of us that work with Aborigines are meeting a friend. She lives on the outside of town. She's sort of this odd girl that showed up here about a year ago. And we bring her food, but a whole group of people working with Aborigines are going to go out and take her dinner tonight. You might want to come and get some other ideas of things that you want to photograph." So I said, "Great." So I follow this address. I drive to the outside of town, and it's this ramshackle, collapsing house. No roof on the house. The walls are falling in, and I think I must have gotten the directions wrong. So I kind of walk up to the door and I knock on it. And of course, who answers the door but the woman washing the windows of the hotel, who's not at all happy to see me. And she said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, well, your friend Jenny invited me. And she said, well, put your cameras down. You can't photograph my friends. I said, fine. So I walk inside. In the backyard, she's got 4 camels tied up. I said, why do you have camels? And she said, it's none of your business. So I go to Jenny, who was working for me. I said, what is with your friend? Like, I'm sorry, I took a picture of her. And she said, oh, Robin's really lovely once you get to know her. And I said, well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. I said, why does she have camels? And Jane, she said, she's planning to walk 2,000 miles through the outback from here, Alice Springs, out to the Indian Ocean. I said, my God, why? That's so crazy. And she said, we don't know why. We all want to go with her. We're afraid she's going to die out there. She won't let anybody come with her. She's determined to do this by herself. And I said, wow, that's nuts. So throughout the week, I kept running into these people. And at the very end of the week, Jenny came up to me and said, Robin wants to ask you a favor. And now she's a little too embarrassed because she hasn't been very nice to you. And I said, what's the favor? And she said, she wrote to National Geographic a year ago and asked them if they would fund her trip, and they never answered. And she wanted to know if you might know somebody there, if she could use your name, because she doesn't want to wash windows for another year and wait on jerks and pubs. So I said, I've met the editors. I've never worked for the Geographic. Geographic, it's like, when you're 60 years old, you get to work for National Geographic. So I said, tell her sure she can use my name. So I left. I went back to the States. Phone rings. I'm back for about a week, and it's the editor of National Geographic, and his name is Bob Gilk, and he says, we got this letter from this woman in Australia. It sounds really interesting. We're thinking of funding her trip, but is she going to die out there? Is she a nutcase? And I said, she's really intense. I've seen her camels. I've seen her maps. I've seen her, special water. And he says, well, since you guys are such good friends, we're going to sign you to be the photographer. So I show up in Australia, and she now feels like she sold her soul to the devil. We heard yesterday from Laura, who told us a wonderful story about sailing around the world. And I think Robin was very much in Laura's spirit, that she wanted to do this by herself. She didn't really want help. She didn't really want sponsors. But after spending 2 years trying to get ready, she just didn't want to spend a third year. So anyway, I represented the devil that she'd sold her soul to. So she wasn't very happy to see me, despite the fact that I'd kind of opened some doors. This was the cover story that I shot for National Geographic. And as Moses mentioned, I'm going to tell you about the story and tell you some of the things that happened, because it was the most interesting year of my life. But I want to give you a little background and show you sort of how they turned this into a movie, and then take you back to the beginning and tell you how this unfolded. And it was quite fascinating. The most interesting person I think I've ever met. This movie has been made by the guys that did The King's Speech, the same team, and it's being distributed by the Weinstein Company in the United States and by Mongrel Media here in Toronto. It doesn't come out in the States till September, so you're seeing it early. And if we could maybe push the button and turn up the sound. Actually, I have to push the button, sorry. Forgot about that part. No, you have to go back. Can you guys roll it back and then just hit play? I'll give you a little background while this thing is starting to play, which is that, okay, there we go. And we'll roll up the sound a little bit. Ouch.
People ask me why I'm doing it. My usual answer is why not?
Your plan is ridiculous.
You must be mad, girlie. You know, that's about 2,000 miles. 6 months of hard walking.
You want to die out there or something?
I'm so alone.
We all are.
Things that we're afraid of. It seems like a pretty good, instincts. Thank you. But Rob is one of those rare people that is attracted. She wants to go towards the things that frighten her to find out if they're actually worth being frightened of. And it's something I tremendously admired. I'd never met anybody that sort of approached the world this way. I want to show you some of the stories and some of the pictures of her as we go through this. Robin had 4 camels. There's a long backstory about how she got these camels. She did not grow up in a cattle station. She knew nothing about the outback. She just got this idea one day. She was a Japanese and philosophy student at Brisbane University and got this idea in her head that she was going to go live with Aborigines in the desert and learn about them. And because she couldn't afford a car, the camels were the way to do that. The point of the journey was not the camels, although the camels became like 2,000-pound dogs. These animals just adored her. There's always that joke, you start looking like your pets. In fact, my only criticism of the film, and it's a wonderful movie, is that they didn't Robin has a wonderful sense of humor. It's the one thing that I think they were hard to kind of, had to sort of balance back and forth this feeling of seriousness and what this trip was about. One of the things that really astounded me as I watched the movie the first time was that they took a lot of the scenes that I'd shot originally as photographs and turned these scenes into scenes in the movie. So I'm going to show you one more scene from the movie right here.
And so I'm writing to you in the hope that your magazine will sponsor my trip. I believe National Geographic to be of the highest international repute. The trip will take me through some of the most beautiful and barren country the desert can show. I'm enclosing a map of my proposed route from Alice Springs to Ayers Rock, then on through the Western Desert to the Indian Ocean. I have 3 camels and 1 small calf, trained and ready to go. They are perfectly reliable beasts. Their names are Dookie, Bob, Sally, and baby Goliath. I am well aware of the hardship I will be facing, and the first to admit I am remarkably unqualified for such a hazardous undertaking. But this is precisely the point of my journey. I'd like to think an ordinary person is capable of anything. I look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Yours faithfully, Robin Davidson.
How they basically recreate, Mia looks so much like Robin, they even actually created the same clothing that she wore during the trip. This is Robin's father who came to see her off. One of the things that I was, I was terrified every time I left Robin that I would never see her again. I actually had to find her 5 times during the 9-month journey. And there were packs of wild camels, there were snakes. If the camels had thrown her, she'd broken a leg. If the camels ran away, there were so many ways that she could have died. Remember, this is before GPS, there were no cell phones. So if she got in trouble out there, there was basically nothing. There was nothing anyone could have done. And I remember every time I'd leave her, I'd look in the rearview mirror of my Toyota 4-wheel drive air-conditioned car, and then wonder if this would be my last memory of her. She loaded and unloaded 1,500 pounds of gear every morning and every night. She walked about 20 miles a day. And she had this wonderful dog, Diggity, that she'd gotten herself hired by a hospital. She was actually like a janitor in a hospital before the trip began. And she found out they were doing these terrible experiments on animals in the basement. And she basically waited till they trusted her. And then a month after she got this job, she came back one night and let all the animals out of the cages. And this little puppy, Diggity, didn't run away. And that became her companion on the trip. If she walked 20 miles a day, Diggity probably ran 40 because Diggity ran up and down and scampered back and forth. Diggity saved her life several times during the trip, and I won't go into all the stories, but Diggity led her back to camp when she got lost, warned her if there were snakes, if there were marauders, if people were showing up in the middle of the night. This is a very barren sort of area out there. So Ayers Rock was extraordinary. This was actually used to be the middle of this is the bottom of the ocean, millions of years ago. And when it rains in the outback, shrimp hatch on top of Ayers Rock. Incredible. And it only rains like every 15 years out there. I felt like I'd gone to Mars. I felt like I'd been wearing sunglasses my whole life, and suddenly I was seeing color and light unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life. You see Robin at the very bottom of that cave there. This is the side of Ayers Rock. You're not allowed to go to a lot of these places now. This was a long time ago. It's one of my favorite pictures. I shot most of the pictures in color. I thought that the Outback at the beginning was really ugly and that, it was a beautiful backdrop for Robin, but I found it kind of dry. And like for an American, a North American, I think we think of lush, green, beautiful, verdant forests and things like that. And she kept talking about how beautiful the Outback was. And then my picture started changing. It was really interesting. Every time I went out there, I started seeing it more and more through her eyes. Those are flies all over her. You know about the Australian salute? It's this. You do this all day long. You try to keep the flies out of your face. The country was so exotic. It was so beautiful. Her relationship with Diggity was absolutely fascinating to me. I didn't grow up with a dog, but I started loving dogs because of spending this time. Now, one of the cardinal rules that I broke at the very beginning, which is when you work for National Geographic, you have to send all of your photographs back undeveloped. Now it's undelivered. You have to send all of your digital pictures back. But Robin didn't wear clothes a lot during the trip, and which made it was difficult for several reasons. But not the least of which is I didn't want to send naked pictures of her back to these guys in suits at National Geographic. But this is my first assignment for them. So I started developing the film myself in Melbourne at Kodak, assuming that there were machines developing the pictures nobody was looking, and I would only send them what I wanted them to see. And I got really, really angry phone calls and telegrams at the time saying, you're breaking the cardinal rule, you have to send it. I made excuses, but I basically always edited the film myself. And they said, you're never going to work for us again. And at the end of the trip, because I think they were so happy with the pictures, everybody kind of forgot about the fact they were really irritated with me. Robin would sit by the campfire at night and learn to speak local Pitjantjatjara, the local Aboriginal language. The conversations we had, when I was 28 years old, I was about 19 years old emotionally, so every girlfriend I'd had lasted about a week, and then whenever anything got difficult, I would take an assignment, and I would leave, and I said, we'll work this out when I get back, and I would never, ever come back. But with Robin, I kept having to come back, and she was the most direct person I've ever met. And I remember one night we were sitting around, and she said, you Americans treat friendship like Valium. And I said, it was like the insult of the day. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And she said, wherever I see Americans together, they're always saying, don't worry, everything's fine, it'll all work out. I said, and that's bad because, she said, because in Australia, if you care for somebody and they're marrying the wrong person or doing drugs or doing something stupid, you hit them over the head with a 2x4. You risk your friendship to be a friend. And I mean, we had so many conversations like that where these were thoughts I'd never heard from anyone before, and it was like really refreshing and surprising. Literally, I could tell you stories for several hours about the trip. Once I showed up, after having just, I would leave her and go off and shoot stories for Time Magazine or the New York Times. I was a freelancer. And I remember getting there once, and I sat down, and I was going on about something I've been shooting, and she said, when are you going to get here? And I said, what? And she goes, when are you going to get here? And I thought, oh my God, and this is like she's been 2 months in the trip. She's by herself out there. I thought she's gone crazy. I said, I'm sitting right in front of you. She said, no, you're not here. She said, you're worrying about your film from the Taiwan cover story for Time. Where are you going to leave the car in 4 weeks? You're never here. You come out here. If you're going to be with me, then goddamn be out here. But don't be lost in your head the whole time somewhere else. And that was the other thing that amazed me is she was always completely present. And one of the things I said to her is, you've got to keep a journal because someday you're going to want to write a book about this. And she said, why do you have to turn everything into a product? Why can't you just experience things and not be marketing it and selling it and thinking of how you're going to tell your friends and how it's going to be? I said, okay, but someday you're going to write a book. She said, I'm never writing a book about this, okay? I didn't do this trip. No one still to this day knows why she did the trip. So after the trip was over, she called me like a year later and said, you're not going to believe this, but I wrote a book about the trip. I said, really? And I said, do you want my notes? Because I kept journals. I mean, I filled journals every day. And she said, no, I think I did okay, but I want you to read it because I'm not very nice to you in the book. And so I read the book, and like at the beginning, I'm a jerk, and then I get better as the trip goes on. I said, it's fine. But what amazed me is that when she wrote this book, she literally could remember the trip most of us have memories that are like sedimentary layers where the most recent is very fresh, and then as it goes back, it fades. She remembered the patterns that the ants made, that the insects made in the sand. She remembered this whole thing in such extraordinary detail. She wrote a book called Tracks, which sold 1 million copies in 18 languages. It's obviously the basis of the movie. And I'm going to just jump one more ahead here. She was fascinated by the Aborigines, and they were fascinated by her. And she was one of the few white people that went out there and actually spent the time to live with them. And I went out there not to take pictures of them or to do stories about them, but she wanted to learn from them. She wanted to understand their culture. She took the time to learn their language. And they called her the Camel Lady. And she hated that. She said, it makes me sound like a crazy person. But everything about this trip made me wonder what I was doing. And I remember at the end of the trip, she said to me one day, "Are you going back to being a prostitute?" This is like, we'd been together now for 3 months. And I said, she's still like poking me. And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "Well, I feel like before my trip, somebody would call you and say, care about Aborigines this week, care about Taiwan tomorrow, go do a story about Indonesia." Like, somebody winds you up and says, "Go care about this." You're basically, you're a hired gun. And she said, "So are you?" She said, "I feel like my trip is the first time you've actually cared about something that was more than just your career, more than just a story. So the question is, at the end of my trip, are you going back to being a prostitute, or are you going to actually figure out, find something where you can use your skills as a photographer to try to change the situation?" Which actually led to me meeting Natasha, and I won't tell you all that story. She met a man named Mr. Eddie, who was this Aboriginal man that traveled with her in the outback for about 6 weeks. And Moses, if you'll allow me to play one last clip. This is Robin and Mr. Eddie when the tourists show up one day.
White parrot.
Where? Come on, Bob. Stand up. Come on. Come on, Bob. Come on. Stand up. Come on, get up. Come on, Bob. Come on. Come on, Andy.
Hold up there, love.
Hey,
Please,
can we take a photo?
I'll take your photo.
Yeah, let us take your photo. Can you stop so we can take a photo? Please. Where are you heading?
Thanks, love. How far are you going?
I'm going to the ocean.
To the ocean? You're dreaming?
Hey, Jackie Jack. Get a photo with the camel, boy. Take
Hey.
a picture, eh?
Jack,
Hey, whoa, steady.
you're a prick.
What's the problem?
Bloody swine.
Hey. Give me money. Give me money. Give me money. Money. Yeah, don't give him too much.
Moses allowed me one more minute to show you something very cool. So we did a book many years ago called From Alice to Ocean, which sort of captured, it sort of combined the tracks book in small part with a lot of photographs that was never published in National Geographic. We're doing a new book right now, which has a very cool feature in it, which is that you can take out your smartphone and you can point at about 20 different pictures in the book, and immediately on your smartphone, it actually plays that scene in the movie. So you get to point at the original pictures of Robin. I'm going to show it to you right now. It's very cool. This book comes out in September. Let's just turn the volume on here. And with the help of our camera crew here, so this is the book, if you want to show the front of that. And then I'm just going to open, and this is the page where you saw Robin writing the letter to National Geographic. And all I do is turn this on, and I simply point at the picture, and that quickly, it's now streaming over the internet. This will work anywhere in the world. It's a program called Erasmus. It's totally free, and it's kind of delightful because you get to see the original Robin, and then you get to see exactly how that scene was played in the movie. And I don't think anyone's ever done this in a book before. It's an interesting way of sort of combining the original journey with this journey to the screen. Mia and Adam were incredible in the movie. The folks at Seesaw Films did a wonderful job on it. And the other thing I want to recommend to you is that if any of you are looking for a great book, yeah, this is another whole story. Tracks itself, the paperback, is just being re-released now, and it's a wonderful read. Even if you love the movie or you are interested in the picture book, you're inside Robin's head, and you just can't. As I said, this book sold 1 million copies in 18 languages, and it's very much in the spirit of Laura Decker that we heard from yesterday. I think the two of them are soulmates. So Moses, thank you so much. We'll close with a book together.
Rick, what's uncanny is not only does Mia Wasikowska look a tremendous amount like Robin Davidson, but Adam Driver looks a lot like Rick Smolan.
They were great. You know, one of the things Adam said to us was that they were very nice and flew me down to be on set. He said in America, he would have not been allowed to pick up the cameras because of the unions. And he said in Australia, not only could pick up the cameras, but when he wasn't on set, he was holding the boom mics, he was helping move boxes. He said the Australian crews, it was so much more fun because they were all working together. They were out in the outback for 2 months, 100 people in the outback for 2 months. And the movie is just, it could have been such dreck, and they did such a wonderful job with it. So I hope it's actually playing here in Toronto right now at the Varsity Theatre down the street, but it won't be out in the States till September.
I was privileged to see a special screening. Go out and see it. It's really a captivating
take a
movie.
picture?
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay. That's good. Moses, would you indulge me?
Yes.
Can I have your book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Let me get my mystery.
Okay. And
To Mr. Eddie Hat.
is this the shutter?
Yes, sir. Yes, that's good.
Okay.
That's good.
And okay. Oh, it's old-fashioned. I hear the click and everything. It's so satisfying.
He's getting carried away now.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.